So many things happened over the years. At first, I just thought it was the place we lived, until we moved, and the paranormal followed us. I was born in London around the mid-80s. Growing up, my mum was very spiritual. She would read tarot and runes, and we lived in a small maisonette on a council housing estate that was built sometime in the mid-70s. Odd things would always happen. Toys being moved, strange noises, even to the extent of what some would call a mimic. At my young age, I didn't know that an imaginary friend was only seen by the one person who created it in their mind. For as long as I can remember, I had always seen a young boy with dark hair, blue eyes and pale skin, dressed in a cowboy outfit, playing along the landing, although there were no boys in our block other than my big brother. I had always thought it was perhaps a kid from another block, but I never recognized him as someone from our school. It was in the early 90s, and most people left their doors open during the day or at least unlocked. I remember coming downstairs and seeing the young boy in my hallway. He looked at me with a blank expression and walked off. He never said a single word to me ever. I remember my mum would have hushed conversations with her friends about my sister and her imaginary friend. She seemed worried that my sister, who is 5 years older than me, still had what she saw as a childish imagination. She'd been getting into some serious trouble which wasn't like her, and was blaming her imaginary friend. One evening, I was on my way to the toilet when I heard my sister talking in the bathroom. The bathroom had one of those sliding doors with a hook lock that never seems to close all the way. I was confused and peeked through the slither in the door. There, knelt on the floor leaning into the bath, was my sister, and sat in the bath was the young lad. I stared at him frozen. She was talking to him like having a full two-way conversation, but he was saying nothing. That night as we were laying in bed, I asked my sister about the boy. She was shocked. She couldn't believe I could see the cowboy. I don't know how long this kid stayed with her. I didn't dare ask. He creeped me out. But years later, after we had all moved away, I was sat in her kitchen with her as she asked her son why he had done something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it had concerned us both. Her young son looked her dead in the face, shrugged his shoulders and told us, "Cowboy told me to do it." Now on to the next story. It was coming up to Christmas of 1996. My mom was fiddling with a cassette player, my stepdad was at work, my brother and one of my sisters were at my friends' houses, and we had some neighbors over. My sister had gone upstairs to use the toilet, but about 30 seconds after she left the room, I heard my mum say, "Well, that was quick, you didn't flush?" We had all turned to the doorway to see my sister standing there smiling at us. Then we heard the flush from upstairs. She just faded, for lack of a better word. A moment later, my sister walks back down the room confused as to why my mum is staring at her. Now I have to say this. My sister is the spitting image of my mum's mum who passed away in 1987. We moved in 1997. As I said before, my mum would read runes and tarot cards. It was a frequent thing for her cards to be blown off the table. She would also have a blue velvet reading mat. Once, she had left her cards set up and gone to answer the door. I happened to be in the room. No one else touched her cards or even the table. When she returned and started to turn the cards face up, underneath was a pile of skin flakes. We had cup hooks on the underside of a cupboard that was above a serving hatch. My mum had her teacups hanging from it, and one day, those cups literally exploded one by one, with no explanation. Also, for as long as I can remember, I've always been able to see things not everyone could. I have also known things I shouldn't know. For example, August 1997. I'm 11 years old, and I shared a room with one of my sisters. We both had been in bed and asleep for a few hours when I woke up from a dream in a panic. Now, I don't know why I was panicking, but I almost fell out of my bed and hurried to wake up my sister and told her that Princess Diana was dying. My sister, annoyed at me for waking her up and telling me to go back to bed and that it was just a dream. But I insisted. I was in tears. She came downstairs with me to prove her point. She turned on the news channel, and it didn't take long before it flashed up on the screen and everything was overtaken with the breaking news about the accident. This freaked my sister out so badly that while we sat there glued to the TV, she went to wake up my mum and stepdad. A few months later, my mum took me to this spiritualist church where they had mediums and Reiki healers. After the mediums had finished, one of the Reiki healers waved us over. She said she was drawn to me. She sat me down and started a healing session, and we both felt what I can only describe as static around us. When she came and knelt in front of me and asked how long I had been a spiritual bridge, she said my energy told her that the paranormal is drawn to me, like it feeds off my energy in order to make its way over to us. She told me I should wear obsidian for my own protection. I didn't for many years, but have done so for the past 20. The night before 9/11, I was staying with my eldest sister, and she says I woke up to ask her why someone would fly a plane into the building. I don't remember doing this, but she told me about it the next day. I had no idea what the Twin Towers were, let alone where they were, and when the news broke, she dropped her coffee on the floor and stared open-mouthed at me. I lived with my dad for a little while, over a year when I was a teenager. We had a very sweet dog and lived in an old 2-bed house in a small rural town. The house itself always made me uneasy. I never liked to be alone there. Well, one night when my dad was at work, I sat in the dining room on the computer, talking to my friends in the States on Yahoo Chat. My dog was curled up beside me. Where I sat, my back was to the door. I never felt comfortable leaving the door open when I was at the computer. It must have been around 1 a.m. when my dog whimpered and her ears perked up. I looked at her and felt a sense of dread. I remember I placed my hand on the top of her head for comfort and was just about to say something to her when a huge bang made me jump from my seat. The dog darted towards the door, all hair standing on end. A deep growl coming from her, which was something I'd never heard her do before. Then another. It was coming from above us in my room. I stood there in fear, my dog between me and the door. I heard loud footsteps running down the stairs. They were so hard that my dad's ornamental guns fell off the wall that blocked the stairs. They stopped at the door. My dog starts to back away in fear, and the door begins to shake violently. It felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds or so of shaking before the door bursts open so violently that one of the wood panels cracked. There was no one there. I was just frozen in fear, with my dog now cowering at my feet, growling. After a moment, I regained control of my limbs and checked the hall. No one. I was and had been alone all this time. This isn't a webcam, and scared my friends as much as it did me. Now, I don't always hear or see things. It's getting rarer the older I get, but I can always sense when there's something around. My friend has a childlike spirit in her house. He doesn't like her Hoover. When I told her this, she laughed and responded with, "Yeah, I know. Apparently it will turn itself off when she's using it." Maybe 14 years ago now, I woke up in the middle of the night to see a very elderly Indian man dressed in traditional Southern Indian clothing, standing next to my bed, staring at my sleeping husband. I didn't feel fear or apprehension, more akin to a wave of warmth and love. I had no idea who he was, but mentioned it to my husband that he had a visit during the night. He was skeptical, so I didn't go into detail. The following January, we went to India to visit my husband's family. There was a photo on a shelf, wearing the same clothes. I come to discover it was my husband's late grandfather. So those are the events of my life. Am I haunted? Or am I just what the Reiki healer said I am? I guess it's down to you to decide. Last night we checked into the Sterling Villas in Uluwatu, which happens to be next door to the abandoned Wyndham Dreamland Resort, for a one-night stay. During the day everything was fine. We went out early into the evening around 7 PM and returned at around 9 PM. Before we went out, we made sure to leave the air conditioning on in our room, which is a separate building to the living room/kitchen area, so that it would be nice and cool when we got back. Here's a brief summary of some things that happened when we returned. We noticed the air conditioning had switched off. I guess it's not the most unusual thing to happen, so we switched the aircon back on and then went into the pool. When we got out of the pool and returned to the room, it was off again. About half an hour later, I went back into the room to turn it off and get my water bottle in order to make tea. And while I was making tea in the living room, which is a completely separate unit to the bedroom, I noticed from the reflection in the mirror that the TV in our room was on. I asked my friend if she'd switched it on and she said no. Maybe it was a ghost. As soon as she said that, the TV switched off by itself. We were a bit freaked out at this point. My friend told me that she thought she'd seen an all-black figure walk across the window where the pool and table are in the mirror's reflection while she'd been getting ready for us to go out earlier in the evening. At first she thought it was me, but I of course wasn't dressed in black, but she just didn't want to freak me out. We decided to try and not overthink it, and so we went to bed. I had left my cup and the teaspoon on the table outside my bedroom by the pool. I left the teaspoon on top of the empty paper creamer packet so that it didn't drip on the table as it had been in my tea. When we were in bed, we heard a noise that sounded like the teaspoon being put down on the marble table. Not a sound like it had been dropped, but just put down with a reasonable amount of force. We were very freaked out by that point. I decided to try and Google some of the hotel reviews and found the following, which I think you might appreciate. These villas look good from the photos, but the service and staff are not great. Apart from that, all 5 of us experienced supernatural activities. Then found out there are 2 large abandoned hotels next to us. After asking locals, they confirmed that the abandoned villas at Wyndham Hotel next door are haunted, and you can see figures of light at night, even though the electricity has been disconnected. We didn't take it seriously at first and laughed about it, but even our 3-year-old child walked out of his room in the middle of the night and explained how the chair was moving in his bedroom by itself, and he saw a ball of rainbow lights floating in his room. It sounds strange writing such a review on Google, but beware. The doors open by themselves, TVs don't work and randomly turn on by themselves in the middle of the night. Black clouds appear in the middle of the bedroom. Even ChatGPT started talking on our phone, saying it could see a little boy standing next to us. Later, it said it was not able to see things through the phone, and it must be a random glitch. We heard random loud screams in the middle of the night, so loud it sounded like someone being murdered, and footsteps going up and down your villa at 3 AM when you know everyone is asleep. These beings are interactive. According to the locals, the spirits of the mountain are angry and feel disrespected by the tourists and construction. There were a few members in our family who didn't believe in the energies, but were convinced that these events were supernatural. We had to check out halfway, as it was getting to be too much. Beware, and read about the haunted hotel in Uluwatu on Google, which is next door before you book here. Apart from that, the rooms are smelly and the service is poor. There is a construction happening next door, and we didn't get bath towels for 3 days after entering the hotel. All in all, we decided we were too scared to stay there, and we packed our stuff to leave. I remembered I'd left a couple of things on the table where the spoon was, and so I went to grab them before we ran out the door. As I approached the table, I noticed that the spoon was still on the table, but the creamer packet that the spoon was on top of earlier was on the floor, across from the table. We left and went back to Kengu for our homestay. I know this sounds quite minor, but after we read the reviews, we knew we couldn't stay there as we were too freaked out. The weird thing is that aside from the review I found, we can't find anything else online about it, so I'm really intrigued as to whether anyone knows or has heard about this location or surrounding abandoned hotels, or any perspectives from visitors in Bali and Indonesian or Balinese locals. I was in my old church in Connecticut, changing some light fixtures in an upstairs hallway. The Boy Scout troop who uses this space at night had reported footsteps before, but I thought nothing of it. I had a 6-foot ladder out with the new fixture on the paint step and 2 new 3-inch screws on the top step. As I reached up to take the bowl off the old fixture, I felt a poke in my chest, then heard a ding ding ding. I looked down, and one of the screws was on the top step, and the other was now rolling around in the new fixture below. I did not shake the ladder. I told it to scram and that I was busy. I've had encounters before, but not here, and I changed the fixture without further issue. I moved to the room next door and kept the lights off so that I could change some fluorescent tubes. While in the first fixture, the light adjacent flashed on and off 3 to 4 times. I did 2 more fixtures, and each time a nearby fixture would flash. I finally said, "Knock it off," and got out of there. A friend with abilities came through a few months later and made the comment that there was an angry man up there who doesn't want anyone in his space. Apparently this phantom had tried to scare me off. I work in a museum and also give guided tours in a nearby medieval prison in my town. It was built in 1524, and executions and torture took place there, so it has seen a lot of history and suffering over the centuries. The building itself is incredibly haunted, or at least it feels that way most days. We hear creaks coming from the floor, windows, and doors all the time, even when there is no wind and no one else in the building. Sometimes it sounds like footsteps, shifting just out of sight. There are also certain spots where the energy just feels off, like walking into a cold pocket of air. Most of us who work there have gotten used to it, but we still talk about it sometimes, especially after something unusual happens. You learn to just brush it off a lot of the time, but every now and then something happens that's harder to explain away. So there was this one time when I was standing alone in the middle of what we call the main cell area. It's a large open space with several old cells lining the walls, and the acoustics in there make even the smallest sound echo slightly. It was completely silent at the time, which made the whole place feel even more isolated. I remember checking the time and wondering where the group was, since they were a little late, and after a minute or 2 I turned around to see if they had maybe come in without me noticing, and that's when I saw it. Right near the doorway, just at the edge of my vision as I turned, a shadow figure passed by. It wasn't vague or shapeless. It had a clear human outline, like a person walking quickly across the entrance. The movement was fast and smooth, almost like someone in a hurry trying not to be noticed. It crossed the doorway in less than a second, and then it was just gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at the doorway, trying to process what I'd seen. I half expected someone to step back into view, or for the door to move, but everything stayed completely still. What surprised me the most was my reaction, though. I always thought if I ever experienced something like that, I'd be completely terrified, like heart racing, ready to run out the building. But I wasn't. I didn't feel scared at all. If anything, I was just kind of stunned and fascinated, like my brain was trying to catch up with what had just happened. I stayed there for another minute or so, just replaying it in my head, making sure I hadn't imagined it or misinterpreted a shadow from the outside. But the shape had been too clear, too defined, Eventually, I heard voices approaching from the entrance, and the tour group finally arrived. I shook it off, greeted them like normal, and went right back into my usual routine, explaining the history, pointing out the cells, talking about the executions and the stories tied to the place. The whole time though, that moment stayed in the back of my mind. It didn't ruin the day or make me want to leave, but it definitely changed how I looked at that space. Since then, I have been a lot more aware when I'm in that area alone. Nothing that clear has happened to me again personally, but I am now more wary in case something else happens to me out there. I have never been a believer in ghosts or anything paranormal in nature for that matter. But this is something that isn't sitting right with me. When my mum told me the story of what happened and sent me the picture of what she saw, my heart honestly skipped a beat, and I have been unwell. So, my mum works in this hotel/restaurant up in Wisconsin. I live in Georgia. The restaurant is closed on Sundays and Mondays, and she was covering for someone on the hotel side until 11:30 p.m. She was cleaning and going in and out of the restaurant because that's where the coffee is, and she replaces the coffee every few hours, so the lights were still on. Well, she was just watching the cameras because she was expecting 2 check-ins, when all of a sudden something caught her eye from inside the restaurant. She immediately calls the guy that was going to be working starting at 11:30 to see if he could come right away, and was going to lock herself in the office, because apparently it shook her to her core. The guy came 4 minutes later, I guess because my mum was going to have a heart attack. This figure was still there, and even the guy saw it on the camera. So when they went into the restaurant, nothing was there. They looked everywhere, and when they went back to look at the camera, the figure was gone. I still feel bad for my mum. I don't know what it could be, but whatever it is, looks creepy as hell. Almost 20 years ago, I had a physical encounter with a ghost. This occurred at the old Spokane, Washington steam plant, now a restaurant, the steam plant and grill, with a mini shopping area near the street. Back in the day, before modern heating systems, the steam plant provided heat and climate control to our old hospital. Think how Russia still heats their apartments in the city even today. When it closed, it was abandoned, but later it was declared a historic landmark and was revitalized with much old equipment kept intact. You can eat at the restaurant and tour around looking at the equipment used at the time, even go into one of the old cooling towers. Around 2005, my mum had a shop there for a bit. I was going to the local college after a summer in the Forest Service and was wearing a heavy jacket I earned helping with a fire. The thick collar was always crooked, and it drove my mum nuts. Personally, I felt like a rebellious young lady and let it be. Bring a good and proper young lady. While I struggled socially due to mild autism, my brain is good at picking up specific details, bits of odd info, and when I was younger, I was obsessed with ghosts, UFOs, and cryptic things in general. That and disasters and forensics. I wanted to see a ghost, see Bigfoot, and meet an alien. As I got older, I got more into the sciences and more logical, but a tiny bit of me still loved those topics. Anyway, that day I was helping my mum in her shop when I asked for a break to stretch my legs, plus I wanted to look around the historical markers and use them to help me talk to customers about the building's history. Usually nothing strange happened, except twice the restaurant accountant literally fled to my mum's shop, absolutely terrified because she claimed the ghost had touched her shoulder like it was looking over her shoulder as she worked on the computer. Mum usually gave her coffee to calm her nerves, and she refused to go back to work until her husband got there. Usually Mum just rolled her eyes and chuckled in private. She was terrified. Anyway, as I left, my mum once again nagged me more about my crooked coat collar. I rolled my eyes and left, but apparently something agreed with my mum that day. As on the second floor, I was reading a few displays when suddenly I could feel a hand grabbed the left side of my jacket collar, lift my whole winter coat up a few inches off my shoulder, and then set it back down like a very old, annoyed person, resulting in a near-perfect collar. Now, I have been pranked as a kid multiple times. I knew how to do a fast 360 spin on my heels. Immediately I spun around, and to my shock, there was no one near me. The closest person was about 40 feet away, calmly reading her own display. I immediately shouted out at her, confused, "Hey, did you just straighten my collar or see who did?" She looked at me bewildered. I then told her what happened, and she told me bluntly, "No, I was nowhere near you. Only you and we were up here." Her face suddenly grew pale, and she started stuttering, saying she had to go anyway. Her reaction confused me, until the memory of this poor restaurant accountant popped into my head. I too decided it was time to leave, and my mild autism kicked in hard. I had to report this to the authorities immediately. Flying down the stairs, it was clear that the police could not do anything. Spokane has no Ghostbusters, so I needed to report this to restaurant management. So I bolted to the restaurant and told the greeter up front that I had to talk to the manager now. Apparently, my look of fright convinced her to do exactly that. When he came out, he said he was rather busy, but asked what I needed, and I immediately told him what had transpired moments ago. The guy literally smiled, laughed, and then said, "Congratulations, you've just met the ghost." Seeing my confusion about his levity, he explained that apparently some think one old employee who worked here when it was still a steam plant never actually left after passing away. He was a benign spirit, never harming a soul, but he had this curiosity about new technology. Many employees and customers reported feeling a hand or presence on their shoulder, as if someone was looking over and asking, "What are you doing?" The same thing happened when working on desktop computers. Other people would see a human-shaped shadow moved along the surface or wall, but there'd never be a human body to go with it. Nothing bad ever happened. The ghost was just curious. While I processed this like a slow computer doing AOL dial-up, he patted me on the shoulder, thanked me for telling him what happened, but that he had to get back to the kitchen, but pausing, he admitted a heavy coat collar being fixed was a new one for the ghost before leaving. Still in an adrenaline state of shock, I went back to my mum's shop and told her what had happened. I expected to be mocked, but my religious mum admitted recently she sensed she had been watched once or twice. A recently installed picture by a new artist was creeping her out, since she swore she saw its eyes move a few times. At that point, I decided to quote the restaurant manager and told her, "Don't worry, the ghost has never harmed a living soul." Nothing ever happened after that. But a few weeks after, I was thrilled about my ghost experience. It was a relatively benign thing considering most stories are usually scary and physically dangerous. As I worked at a castle hotel a few years ago, I was the unlucky fool who had 1 month of night shifts. The hotel was empty because of COVID. Only me and the janitor were there to look after the hotel. We had plenty of good and expensive rum, gin and whiskey, and other things people could steal, so we watched the hotel at night. And everyone who worked there was sure we had at least one ghost in the hotel. Well, one night at around 2 or 3, we sat in the office and just talked, or just sat there in silence, nothing special. Boring night shift. But not this night. We had the theory of the ghost, and as we sat there we heard footsteps on the 2nd floor. The floor was made of wood, so you could clearly hear when someone walked over it. Especially because it was so quiet, and both of us looked confused. As we went upstairs looking for the source of the footsteps, as we had to be sure no one had gotten inside to steal something, we found nothing. No open windows, no broken doors, or anything else. Every room was still closed, but we could clearly hear those footsteps. Even our boss looked at the security videos the next day but found nothing. We even heard them a few more times, but never found anyone walking through the hotel. It was honestly the strangest thing. I managed an old historic boutique motel on the coast that was built in the late 1800s, and over the years it had passed through generations of the same family. Not long after I started, I met the great-great-grandson of the original owner. He came by occasionally and would sit with me, telling stories about the property. Some of the things he shared stuck with me more than I expected. He talked about a hidden tunnel somewhere on the grounds, used back in the early days for reasons he never fully explained. He also mentioned the number of deaths that had happened there over the years, guests, accidents, illness, things that just sort of piled up with a place that old. But the story that stayed with me the most was about a bride who had fallen out one of the upstairs windows on her wedding day. He didn't dramatize it, didn't try to make it sound scary, he just stated the facts. When I first started managing the place, my apartment on site was still being renovated, so they put me up in one of the upstairs suites temporarily. It was a beautiful room, but it had this large walk-in closet that always felt a little off. Inside the closet was a small old wooden door that led up to the attic. It looked like something out of a different era. Well, out of curiosity, we tried opening it a few times during the day, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it had been sealed shut for years. Well, one night everything changed. I was in the room with my daughter, and my dog was lying near the foot of the bed. Out of nowhere, she started growling low and deep. Her fur stood straight up along her back, and she was locked onto the closet staring. That alone was enough to wake my daughter. We both just sat there for a moment listening to the growl, trying to figure out what she was reacting to. But there was nothing else, no sound or movement, just the dog staring and growling at the closet door. We started arguing quietly about who was going to go check it out. Neither of us wanted to be the one to open it, but neither of us wanted to ignore it either. And then we didn't have a choice. That small attic door, one we hadn't been able to open at all before, suddenly flew open. It just snapped open with force. My dog completely lost it. She went from growling to full panic, scrambling towards the door out of the room, trying to get out. I don't think I've ever seen her get that scared before or since. My daughter started crying, and honestly I wasn't far behind. Whatever confidence I had about handling weird situations disappeared instantly. We didn't investigate, we didn't try and explain it, we simply left. And the next day we moved rooms. And from that point on, my dog refused to go upstairs in the building at all. You could try to lead her, call her, anything you wanted, but she would stop at the bottom and not go any higher. I worked there for years after that, and thankfully that was the only strange thing that happened. We had a security camera set up in the lobby, and the monitor for it was in my apartment. The lobby itself was set up like a cozy common area with couches, a big table where guests could sit and do puzzles or play games, and on that table was a handmade checkerboard crafted out of leather with large, heavy checker pieces. At night, after the lobby was closed and completely empty, I would sometimes hear the sounds of pieces being moved, like someone was actually playing a game. More than once I checked the camera when I heard it, and every time the lobby would be empty. There were plenty of other little things over the years too. Unexplained noises, things slightly out of place that constantly felt like you weren't completely alone. But the one thing I can't explain is the bride. It didn't happen often. A figure near the window, the one she supposedly fell from. You'd catch it out of the corner of your eye sometimes, if you looked directly. She'd still be there, but only for a moment. Working there, you learn to function around things you can't explain. But there's always that underlying weirdness. I'm glad I no longer work there. My family moved into a massive old house when I was 10. A cousin of mine was supposed to help us move in. He'd always been kind of eccentric, but nothing alarming. The honestly strange part was how he behaved the moment we arrived. He stood in the doorway for maybe 10 seconds just staring into the empty hall. Then he muttered something about forgetting he had other plans and just left. After that, he avoided the house completely. Be it birthday, holiday, family dinners, he never came, and we always teased him about it, and we joked that he must have seen a ghost. Somehow the imaginary ghost ended up with a name, Daniel. The joke stuck. If something went missing, we always said Daniel took it. A door creaked at night, it was Daniel. It was just dumb, harmless fun. That is, of course, until my little sister began talking. As soon as she was old enough to form sentences, she began saying things that made everyone uneasy. She'd ask my parents to close her bedroom door at night because she didn't like the boy walking in the hallway. She described him casually like it was obvious. He walks slowly. He just looks at me. We brushed it off as imagination. Kids say weird things, right? And now the Daniel joke suddenly began to feel less funny. When I was about 14, my parents decided to rip up the newer flooring to restore the original hardwood. Anyone who's been to an old house knows that it means lots of work. We were sitting on the floor in the process when we uncovered yellow sheets and a small article about a boy named Daniel that had lived in our house decades earlier. The piece was short, almost clinical. It mentioned that he had developmental disabilities and that he died in an accident near the property. The room went quiet in the uncomfortableness. No one said anything. The newspaper was a creepy coincidence, though, given that for years we had an ongoing joke about the ghost's name. And it wasn't for a long while after that when we finally messaged our cousin and asked him why he was so weird about our house, did he tell us that the moment he went into the threshold, he got this awful feeling, and that he decided he wasn't going to go in. One weekend I was at my parents' house. I was with my mother in the living room on the couch just talking. Suddenly I catch in the corner of my house something dark. It was pitch black. Not tall, short, didn't have a specific shape, not human shape. This thing jumped from that spot to another spot. I realized I just saw something. To understand the next part, I must explain the setup in my house. In the living room, we had a big table, big enough to fit 12 people. And on that table, my mother had a tablecloth. So after I saw that black thing jumping from that spot to the other spot, I looked at the tablecloth and saw it moving. I realized that what I just saw was real, and I started shaking and crying. I explained it to my mother and just tried to ignore it, as I could not do anything about it. After 3 days, my sister was in the bathroom. The bathroom is next to the living room, and I heard my sister screaming. I got curious and went to check on her. She came out screaming at me that we have a frog in the bathroom. I told her to calm down and that I would get rid of it. We grew up in the countryside, so I was used to frogs. I entered the bathroom, and as I saw the frog, I froze instantly. It was the largest frog I'd ever seen. It was huge, like a balloon. I began shaking and left. My mother had an acquaintance that was into odd stuff. They were not friends or anything, but she calls this woman and tells her about the frog. This woman told her to catch the frog and put it in a jar and close it, to keep it closed for 5 days, and if the frog doesn't die, she must go and leave it in the river. My mother did just that. The frog didn't die. I believed that the black thing I saw was the frog, but something was attached to the frog because the black thing was like the size of a 5-year-old. After this, nothing else happened. If you have any thoughts about what I'd seen, I'd love to hear it. My grandpa was somewhat into the paranormal, and he always said he would show signs from the other side before he passed. I grew up very close to my grandparents. I saw them nearly every day as a child, and think of them as my second parents. On the night before his funeral, I was trying to write a eulogy for him, and I wanted to use this paper I wrote on him in middle school. The assignment was to write about a character, and my grandpa absolutely fit that description. It got lost after many computer switches over the 20+ years since I wrote it, and my mum had searched for it for years as well. Then that night, as I was trying to write, my mum suddenly gets an idea of where to look. She pulls a specific box out of her storage and rifles through it, pulling out a paper copy of the very assignment. We read it with much laughter and crying, and I wrote my eulogy copying the assignment on my computer with minor edits. It was as if she had pulled the paper out of thin air. I fully believe my grandfather told her where to find it. Before I got married, I visited my grandparents' graves several states away with my husband and introduced him to them. It was meaningful and symbolic to me, if nothing else. A year later, I eloped in Mexico, and on the Dia de Muertos, November 2nd, we had our wedding dinner at the resort restaurant, and we walked through the decorations the resort set up, including multiple ofrendas. As we stood in line, my husband was being affectionate as usual and said, "You're my licorice," which is not his usual nickname for me, Jellybean. He looked stunned for a second as if he didn't know why he said that nickname, then corrected himself to "You're my Jellybean." I asked him why he said that, and then he honestly said, "I don't know. That was my grandpa's nickname for me. I never told him that." Dia de Muertos is meant to be when the veil is at its most thin between the realm of the dead and those alive. And ofrendas are apparently a pathway for loved ones to visit us from the other side. Could it have been my granddad, whispering in his ear? Before I tell my story, I'll start by saying that I do believe in the supernatural, but I am a huge skeptic and don't think these things are as common as people are led to believe. I think most encounters are just people's imagination, or simply explainable occurrences. Now, with that being said, I'm pretty sure what I saw was real, but I would not be surprised to find out I was wrong. So, my cousin and I decided to visit Japan back in 2018 for one of those gigantic Groupon tours, and during this part of the tour, we were at some gigantic shrine. The area for the shrine was enormous, and we were given a few hours to explore. Note that during these types of tours, you're with a group of people around, 10 to 16, and everyone is grouped by 2, and you travel around your touring country via bus and tour guide. We had been walking around this huge property for a while now, and it was almost time for us to meet back at the bus, so we went down a path we hadn't taken yet, but we knew it led back towards the entrance. While heading down that path, there was a fork in the road, and the way going left led down an area with a gate. But the gate was open, so we figured it was allowed to go down there, and thought we'd quickly go down this path because we did have some time left over. While going down there, we saw some of the people who were on the bus with us coming back up the path, so we asked them what was down there. They said it was just some graves and stuff, and me and my cousin decided it wasn't worth it to see some graves, so turned around and headed back with our tourmates. Note, it was kind of overcast, and it would very lightly sprinkle rain every now and then. On our way back, there being about 6 of us in total, we see 2 women dressed in kimonos sitting on a bench in the middle of the field. Now, this bench is about 15 to a maximum of 25 feet away in this field, and is clearly not in the best condition. It seems worn down. Also, this field is about half dirt, half grass. That is to say, it's not like a soccer field where it's clearly primarily grass. This is my first time in Japan, and I've never seen anyone in a kimono before, so decide to take up my brand new Google Pixel phone and take some pictures of the nice scenery, and my cousin and the people were deciding to do the same. As I'm taking the pictures and checking them, I keep noticing that they're blurry and can't seem to get a good shot. I mention this to my cousin, and she says the same thing is happening to her, and it's only their faces that keep getting blurred. It was the same with me only the faces are blurred, and she was using the newest iPhone at the time. I made a comment about how it's kind of raining, so that's probably what caused it, and she agreed. Immediately after that, I hear one of the people we were with and his wife also complaining that their phones weren't taking pictures of the two women in kimonos, and they keep coming out blurry. This is when a chill went down my spine, because I told you in the beginning that I believe in the supernatural, but I'm highly skeptical of people's supposed encounters, and nothing like this has ever happened to me. But with that being said, I can't come up with a logical reason that these 4 people, 1 with a Google Pixel and 3 with iPhones, can't take clear pictures of 2 women about 20 feet away. Over the years, I keep trying to rationalize it, but I don't know, man. My dad is even more skeptical than I am about these things, and as soon as I told him this story, he instantly agreed that it might have been ghosts, because, in his words, those kind of things do happen out there. Also, the fact that what we thought only to be a shrine turned out to be a mass grave site didn't help matters. Before you ask, my cousin and I deleted the pictures because we both were kind of freaked out. So what do you think? Am I just overreacting? Could it have been a glitch on multiple people's phones? Something wrong in the area? The rain maybe? Or might there have been a more spooky explanation to this? I went out with some friends one night, and somehow we ended up deciding to try one of those ghost apps called GhostTube. I'd never used anything like that before, and honestly, I didn't take it seriously. It felt more like something to mess around with than anything real. We started at a cemetery, figuring if the app was going to do anything, it would be there. For a while, nothing really happened, just a few random words popping up that didn't connect to anything. That actually made me more skeptical. It felt exactly like what I expected. After a bit, we left and got back in the car. And that's when things started to feel weird, because the app didn't stop. Even as we pulled away from the cemetery, it kept lighting up, going red, beeping, acting like it was still picking something up. At first, we laughed it off, assuming it was just glitching or maybe reacting to movement or signal changes. But then I pointed my phone towards the trunk of the car. It immediately went red. And that's when the mood changed. We started testing it, moving the phone around the car. The signal would drop back to normal until I aimed it at the trunk again, and every time without fail it lit up. At that point we started talking to it, not because we fully believed it, but because we were curious. The words it gave us didn't make anything better. Most of them were random, but a few stood out. Jeremy, you are annoying. That one actually made us laugh for a second out of nerves, but that kept going. Satan, niece, van, pathetic. None of it formed a clear message, but it didn't feel completely random either. It was just enough to make you start connecting dots. And after I dropped my fence off, I expected everything to go back to normal, but it didn't. I was alone parked outside my house and I checked it again and got the same result. As long as I pointed my phone anywhere else, nothing happened. But the moment I aimed it at the trunk, it lit up red again. That's when it really got to me. I got out the car and walked around it, scanning everything, doors, windows, under the car, nothing. It only ever triggered when it was by the trunk. I started thinking about the car itself. I had bought it used, and before that, it had been a rental. A lot of people had driven it, used it, and left things behind. My brain kept trying to come up with some kind of story, something that would explain why the trunk specifically was the only place to trigger a response. But there was nothing concrete. I went inside, but curiosity didn't go away, and after a while I checked the app again just to see if anything had changed. 2 words popped up. Certainly, demonic. That was enough for me. Whatever was happening, whether it was the app glitching or environmental interference or just my brain trying to make patterns of the randomness, I decided I had had enough and closed the app. And I haven't tried to communicate with it since. Has anyone else experimented with these kind of apps? My wife Jane and I had a true encounter at the Cecil Hotel in the 1980s. As a young married couple from New York vacationing in Los Angeles, California for several days without knowing its dark history. Now, the Cecil Hotel opened in 1924 downtown with 14 floors and many rooms, built first as a luxurious spot for wealthy travelers passing through. Due to the Great Depression, homelessness, and its spot near Skid Row, it quickly turned into a notorious hub for crime, people taking their own lives and mysterious deaths, earning nicknames like Hotel Death and the Suicide Hotel. That was when men and women down on their luck ended their lives there, often alongside folks with psychiatric issues and drug addictions, seeking others in the same mess, living rough inside. In 2011, it was renamed to Stay on Main to shake up the bad reputation tied to murderers, serial killers like Richard Ramirez, who stayed and killed nearby in 1985, Jack Unterwagen in 1991, and as recently as 2013, the Elisa Lam mystery. We checked into the front desk, not knowing any of the history. Not until we researched it later. The clerk handed us the key to room 13. But when we saw the number, we told him we were superstitious, and both felt like it was bad luck straight off. So, he took the key back, and instead gave us the key to room 903, on a higher floor, saying it boasted a nice view of LA. With that, the young bellhop grabbed our luggage and took it upstairs by elevator. One of two old Otis elevator company ones still running smoothly. That was when I remembered that this was the early 1980s, so most hotels used metal keys for rooms, not plastic cards that came later. We stepped into our room, 903, finding it small but nice looking overall, holding that 1930s vintage style. My wife Jane and I found the persistence of the older style pretty cool, since we appreciated vintage. The room felt nice at first, but we found it strange and kind of unsettling how the room came painted blood red with big, glowing, blinking lights already on when we walked in. That was when Jane turned them off quickly, unable to handle the eerie blink going constantly, as neither of us were able to handle the eerie blink consistently. The first night and day at the Cecil Hotel passed fine, without a single odd thing crossing our minds or sleep. The night after that, when we were in bed, I saw Jane tossing and turning restlessly, until she woke up with a start, sitting right up, holding her neck in fear of shaking. So she told me she felt hands around her neck that were tight, like someone was trying to choke her while she slept deeply there. I knew she was not joking around, from the real fear in her eyes was staring wide back at me. That's when I hugged her close and told her everything would be fine. Now, I'm not psychic, but I have a good sixth sense about places, and something about the hotel seemed a bit off from the moment I arrived. Jane and I went back to sleep after calming down. We were only asleep about an hour or so, when a rattling hit our door, like someone was trying to break inside. I woke up fast and approached the door steadily, looking out the peephole, finding no one standing in the hallway. That was when, just as I turned back to bed disappointed, I saw a hotel bellboy in vintage uniform come down the hall through the peephole, red hat, red coat, and then he turned the corner and was out of sight. I got out of the room quickly, still in pajamas, wanting to complain to him about all the noise outside our door so late, and when I turned the corner, there was no bellboy anywhere down the empty passage. That's when I knew it sounded far-fetched and crazy even to me, and I planned not to tell my wife after her choking scare. But since she faced that mysterious spirit in bed, it did not seem so wild to share what passed my view, and I told her of the phantom bellboy, We agreed that if anything else out of the ordinary happened, we would check out first thing in the morning. Our next couple of days at the Cecil Hotel were fine and without trouble. And on our last night there, after a nice dinner out, we returned, putting the hotel key in the door, opening it, and being shocked to see a young female pacing inside our room. She appeared to be in her late 20s with blue eyes and long golden hair, and looked like she was waiting for someone to arrive. We couldn't hear a sound come from her mouth, but her lips were moving. That's when she suddenly opened her eyes wide, terrified, and before we knew it, she was gone, vanished completely. My wife and I could not make heads or tails of the situation, but decided to sleep there and check out of the hotel in the morning. While in bed, we started to hear faint sounds of a couple arguing. It was in the walls. The man sounded older and tough, and the female sounded young and sweet, crying. That was when we heard the slapping sounds, and then a knock at what sounded like the next door over of a young bellboy asking if everything was alright and that there was a lot of noise. We heard an angry, gruff man's voice reply that everything was fine. The arguing continued after the bellboy left, and then a huge crash of the window breaking, like someone trying to jump out of it. We think it was the young lady's spirit fretting earlier, and this was a replay of the horror she endured and the manner of which she decided to leave our world. We checked out first thing in the morning. My wife Jane and I researched New York City Library, finding the story of a young lady who jumped to the 9th floor and was 27 years old, Miss Pauline Otten, in October of 1962, arguing with her estranged husband Dewey, landing on innocent 65-year-old transient George Gianni, killing both instantly. So police first assumed it was a suicide pact, but he had his hands in his pockets, so it was unlikely. All in all, it was a creepy experience, and we never went back to that place. In my life, I have reluctantly had random occurrences of seeing, sensing, and hearing from or dreaming about people who have died. It's jarring and unwelcome. I won't share every experience here, but I will open up about my recent predicament that I'm seeking guidance on. We brought a lovely home from a couple that chose us for the property because of our environmental and farming values. The man built it by hand when he was in his 20s, now in their 70s, and they had to move closer to services since his dementia was progressing. He died this February. His wife and I had written to each other over the 5 years of living here. She invited us to the funeral so that we could learn more about the incredible person who built our house. At the service, the wife told a story that she saw her husband's form in their living room a few days after his death, staring at her and looking at peace. It was very heartfelt and real to her. Recently, I have seen an occasional form in our home that I often confuse with being my husband. I have seen a cat here since we've moved in, and we joked that when this man died, he'd visit the home. Well, it is clearly now the case. Any guidance? I always shut myself off when I feel or see a spirit, but this was a good man. Does anyone have any guidance? I really would like this man to move on.